The tragic story of ValuJet Flight 592, a preventable disaster. Wow. On May 11, 1996, ValuJet Flight 592, a McDonnell Douglas DC-932, embarked on what should have been a routine flight from Miami International Airport to Atlanta, Georgia. The skies were clear, and the day started like any other for the airline's crew and 105 passengers. But within minutes of takeoff, an unthinkable tragedy unfolded, leaving a profound impact on the aviation industry and changing safety regulations forever. A routine departure with a hidden danger. At 2:04 p.m., ValuJet Flight 592 lifted off the runway with Captain Candy Kubek and First Officer Richard Hazen at the controls. Both were experienced pilots, with Captain Kubek being one of the few female captains in commercial aviation at the time. The 27-year-old aircraft had seen extensive service, and while aging, it was certified for flight. What no one on board knew was that the cargo hold contained improperly packed oxygen generators, discarded from outdated emergency equipment. These devices, intended to produce oxygen during emergencies, were incorrectly labeled and lacked protective safety caps. Despite warnings from mechanics, the hazardous materials were loaded onto the flight. Moments before disaster. Approximately 10 minutes after takeoff, the first signs of trouble emerged. The pilots noticed a series of warning lights on their instrument panel, indicating electrical malfunctions. Shortly after, a flight attendant reported thick, black smoke pouring into the cabin from beneath the floor. In the cockpit, Captain Kubek and First Officer Hazen immediately declared an emergency, requesting to return to Miami. Air traffic control cleared them for an emergency landing, but the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Passengers and crew were now battling an overwhelming smoke-filled cabin, with visibility reduced to near zero, and the air becoming increasingly toxic. The deadly inferno in the cargo hold. Unbeknownst to the crew, the oxygen generators in the cargo hold had ignited. The generators, which burn intensely when activated, fueled a fire that quickly consumed the airplane's insulation and electrical systems. The fire burned so hot that it melted control cables critical for the pilots to steer the plane. In the cabin, panic ensued. Witnesses from other aircraft later reported seeing smoke trailing from ValuJet Flight 592 as it struggled to maintain altitude. Passengers were suffocating as the fire consumed oxygen at an alarming rate. A final desperate attempt. As the smoke thickened, Captain Kubek and First Officer Hazen fought to stabilize the aircraft and return to the airport. Their voices, captured on the cockpit voice recorder, reveal the chaos and desperation in their final moments. But the fire had already compromised the aircraft's structural integrity. The pilots lost control as the systems failed, one by one. At 2:13 p.m., just 9 minutes after declaring an emergency, ValuJet Flight 592 plummeted into the remote Florida Everglades at over 500 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic, disintegrating the aircraft and scattering debris across the swampy terrain. Recovery efforts in the treacherous Everglades. The crash site, located deep in the Everglades, presented immense challenges for recovery teams. The swampy terrain was infested with alligators, snakes, and mosquitoes, making it perilous for rescuers and investigators. Due to the high-speed impact, the aircraft was shattered into tiny fragments, and human remains were almost impossible to identify. Recovery efforts took weeks, with workers sifting through mud and water to collect debris and any evidence that could explain the tragedy. Families of the victims were devastated. Many never received their loved ones' remains due to the horrific nature of the crash, leaving them with only memories and unanswered questions. The investigation, a harrowing revelation. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, launched an extensive investigation into the accident. It didn't take long to uncover the root cause: the improperly stored oxygen generators. These hazardous materials, loaded in direct violation of regulations, had caused the deadly fire. Further investigations revealed systemic failures at ValuJet. The airline, known for its low-cost model, had been outsourcing maintenance to contractors. SaberTech, the company responsible for handling the oxygen generators, had not only failed to follow safety protocols, but also mislabeled the hazardous materials as non-dangerous cargo. The NTSB also criticized ValuJet for its lax oversight, and the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, for failing to enforce stricter safety regulations. The final report concluded that the accident was entirely preventable. The tragic story of ValuJet Flight 5192. On May 11, 1996, ValuJet Flight 592, a McDonnell Douglas DC-932, departed from Miami International Airport bound for Atlanta. It was an ordinary sunny day in Miami, and the passengers on board had no idea of the disaster that awaited them just minutes after takeoff. A routine departure turns chaotic. At 2:04 p.m., the aircraft took off, with 105 passengers and 5 crew members. Everything seemed normal until about 10 minutes into the flight, when the cabin started filling with thick, choking smoke. The pilots immediately declared an emergency, but the situation deteriorated rapidly. Unseen danger in the cargo hold. Unbeknownst to the crew and passengers, the cargo hold contained improperly stored oxygen generators. These generators, which are highly flammable, ignited during the flight, causing a massive fire in the aircraft's cargo area. The fire quickly spread, overwhelming the plane's systems and filling the cabin with toxic smoke. Desperate attempts to return. The pilots desperately tried to return to Miami. However, the fire had already compromised the aircraft's structure and systems. Communication with air traffic control became frantic as the crew struggled to maintain control. A fatal plunge into the Everglades. At 2:13 p.m., just 9 minutes after declaring an emergency, the aircraft lost all control and plunged into the Florida Everglades at over 500 miles per hour. The impact was catastrophic, leaving no survivors. The aftermath. The crash site, deep in the Everglades, was difficult to access, and recovery efforts were hindered by the swampy terrain and alligators. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, determined that the improperly packaged oxygen generators caused the fire. This tragedy led to stricter regulations for hazardous materials in air transportation. Legacy of Flight 592. The disaster remains one of the deadliest aviation accidents in U.S. history. It also highlighted the critical importance of cargo safety and the devastating consequences of oversight failures. A turning point in aviation safety. The ValuJet Flight 592 tragedy shocked the nation and sparked widespread outrage. Families of the victims demanded accountability, and the public questioned how such negligence could go unnoticed. The FAA faced intense scrutiny and was forced to tighten regulations for the transportation of hazardous materials. ValuJet, once a rising star in the budget airline industry, suffered an irreparable blow to its reputation. In the aftermath of the disaster, the airline merged with AirTran Airways, effectively erasing the ValuJet name from the skies. The crash also led to the implementation of stricter oversight of maintenance contractors and a renewed focus on cargo safety. It served as a somber reminder of the critical need for vigilance and accountability in aviation. Legacy of ValuJet Flight 5922. Nearly 3 decades later, the ValuJet Flight 592 disaster remains a haunting chapter in aviation history. It serves as a case study of the consequences of complacency and the importance of enforcing safety regulations. For the families of the 110 people who lost their lives, the pain endures, but their legacy has contributed to a safer future for air travelers.